Sometimes more than one, but this morning we're going to do one, but we'll finish it tonight. So if you want the whole thing, come back at 6. By the way, been having a good crowd on Sunday nights, and the preacher's been having a good time. Of course, I'm not the best judge of how things have gone. I'm sort of in my own little world once we get started. Genesis 22, probably the foundational character for the faith that we have in the Bible that we're taught about. The foundational character for that is Abraham. And so we'll begin this series of messages with this morning and this evening talking about Abraham. Genesis 22, we'll begin with the first verse going down through verse 19. And it came to pass after these things, and we'll talk about what those were, that God did tempt, or a better translation would be test, Abraham. And said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah. We'll talk about that place. And offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. So he doesn't know which mountain yet. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. So it took a while to get there, see. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife. Got everything he needs. And they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb. Or literally, God will see himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, bound Isaac his son, laid him on the altar upon the wood, and Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Now, the English doesn't convey that as clearly, but Abraham is coming down with the knife, is what that is pictured in the Hebrew. I mean, he's really doing it. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, or look, a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Yahweh-Yireh, that is, the Lord will see. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the 2nd time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, that is, I'll bless the blessing of thee, is what it's really saying. And I'll multiply the multiplication of thee. As the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men. They rose up, went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. All right, there's a play on words here in Hebrew. The name of the place, Moriah, it comes from the Hebrew word ra'ah. You thought I'd get ready to cough, didn't you? Which means to see. The Lord will see for himself a lamb. In the mount of the Lord it will be seen. The idea is whatever is needed, the Lord is going to see to it. In fact, Warren Wiersbe has said that when Isaac said, "Where's the lamb?" that in effect Abraham was saying, "The Lord will see to it." Aren't you glad the Lord will see to it? If we trust Him, if we're willing to surrender, if we're willing to yield and not hold anything back from Him, He'll take care of whatever we encounter. Now, Abraham is known in the Bible. He is called the friend of God. Only person in the Bible. The nearest thing to that is that God spoke to and talked with Moses like a man talks to his friend, but Moses is not really called the friend of God. Abraham is. Abraham is also called the father of the faithful. Abraham is the paradigm for what it is to be justified by faith. If you turn in your Bible right quick to chapter 15 of Genesis and verse 6. And it says, "And Abraham believed the Lord." He leaned upon the Lord. He amened. That's what the word amen means. It means to lean. I'm glad that's a good... I leaned on the other side last week. Maybe I straightened it up this time. But it means to lean, to trust. He leaned upon the Lord, and the Lord counted it to him for righteousness. Now we know that Abraham didn't do everything right, did he? No. His heart was in the right place, but he couldn't live up to that. Just like you and I. That's why Jesus came. Because we don't perform good enough. None of us are good enough that we'll go to heaven when we die because we are so good. No. Jesus is the only person that would have went to heaven if it took good works. And He came from there. He came from there to help us get there, because just think, He wants us anyway, even though we don't deserve it. He loves us that much. True saving faith normally... The norm for saving faith is it produces a life of faithfulness. That's the norm. Didn't say that's the average. Didn't say that's the most common. Didn't say that just sort of automatically just you just sort of sit back and it just happens. No. But from a biblical perspective, it is nothing but normal for a person who has saving faith to live a life of faithfulness. That should be what happens with each of us. It should be. But you know, we got lots of names on church rolls. When we pastored up in the mountains, I didn't realize there's people up there that long ago, but that church been started in the 1700s. Then in the cemetery, which was probably 8 or 10 acres, there's a whole section that there's a pile of gravestones under an oak tree because they didn't know where they fit. And a whole section that had been slaves that were buried and stuff. And they just mowed over it and don't do anything there, you know. But on the church roll, there was a guy, as far as we know, was about 170 years old. Far as we know. I never heard from him. The second church we served, not too far from here, over in Sampson County near Spivey's Corner. Lots of names on the church roll there that they didn't know what had become of. There was a couple of young soldiers that during World War II were in training down here at Fort Bragg and joined the church. And then they got sent off to war, and their names are still on the roll over there because they don't know. I don't know whether they lived through the war or what. Now those are sort of unusual. There's lots of names on church rolls that's people that live within a couple of miles that just no longer involved. What does that say about faithfulness? What does that say about saving faith? You see, lots of people, I'm afraid we've made the gospel too easy. The gospel is very simple, but the gospel, there's nothing easy to it. It's a simple thing, though it's deep truths that God became a human being, was born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, and died the death I should have died on the cross, paid for my sins, and rose again, proving He paid for all of them. Those are simple, though deep truths. If I will trust in Him, He will give me the free gift of eternal life. But where we stumble is about the trusting in Him. That's not something you do for a minute, is it? It's the surrender of the rest of your life. To live by faith, trusting in Him every step of the way, every second of the way, every hour and day of the way, whatever comes. To be yielded to Him. Abraham gives us a picture of that. This story, more than any other about Abraham, which is why I selected this one, shows faithfulness. Now we know from studying the book of Genesis on Wednesday evenings and having preached on these things before, Abraham's had a struggle in his life. For one thing, one of the central facets of the struggle of Abraham, and you've got a struggle in your life, by the way, to live on earth is to have some struggle. And they didn't tell us when I was young, or I wasn't listening, that it gets harder as you go along. I thought it got easier. I thought you knew more. I thought by the time you got my age, you kind of knew everything. I don't know as much as I used to. It's whittled down to a few things I think I got close to right. Abraham struggled. Well, his name was Abram to start with. Avram in Hebrew, it means exalted father. But the first time that Sarah is mentioned, we'll find out back in chapter 11 in the genealogy, before it ever starts the story, it says she couldn't have any children. You ain't a daddy if you don't have children. You ain't a daddy until you have children. His name was Exalted Father, and he didn't have any children. And God told him to come out from your place that you're familiar into this land of Canaan, and I'll make you a great nation. That is, you're going to have a lot of children. He is 75 then. Of course, he lived to be 175, so we need to factor in, he was approaching middle age, I guess. Well, when he was 99, one of the several times that the Lord appeared to him, the Lord said, okay, we're going to change your name now from Exalted Father, Avram, we're going to change it to Abraham. We're going to change it to Father of a Multitude. And he still, how many children has he got? Yeah. And so Abraham looks over at Sarah, and Sarah says, don't look at me. She's 89. He's 99. She says, maybe we're supposed to help God out a little bit. Let's take Hagar, the slave that we got when we was backsliding in Egypt last time. And you can have a child with her, and I'll take care of the child. Well, she'll be a surrogate mom. You think that what goes on in this world is all new? It's a lot of... I mean, they didn't have to decide what their pronouns were back then. But we'll have a surrogate mama. So anyway, a baby is born, and all it was a complication. Baby's named Ishmael. And Abraham doted on that child until, remember, those 3 men came to see Abraham, and 2 of them were angels going to Sodom to destroy it because his nephew Lot was down there backsliding. The 3rd one was the Lord in some form, who stayed and told Abraham, among other things, this time next year, Sarah is going to have a son. And she was in, the tent walls are not thick. And she was inside. She heard that. She went, and the Lord said, why'd you laugh? She said, oh, I didn't laugh. He said, yes, you did. Abraham laughed too. You know what they named the boy? Laughter. Isaac, Yitzhak, means to laugh. Of course, we associate laughter with happiness, don't we? Yeah. I mean, there's all kind of laughs, but it was a happy day. But now there's 2 boys and there's 2 mamas, and that's one too many mamas at home. And it got real crowded in that tent. And Sarah said, we got to get, it's your fault, Abraham. Guys, whatever happens is your fault. You got to get rid of her. Finally, the Lord gave him some direction, said, it's going to be all right. I'll take him off and make another nation out of Ishmael. So Ishmael and Hagar are gone. And they're out of Abraham's life. As far as Abraham knows, he doesn't know where they're at, what they're doing, all of this. Now they're down to this one little boy. What brought it to a head was they had a party for Isaac when he was weaned at probably about age 3 or 4. They didn't wean babies till they was past most of the infant sicknesses and things. He was 3 or 4, and they had a weaning roast. And Ishmael was teasing him or playing with him or sporting with. Same word is used for Isaac caressing his wife another time when Isaac had told, same lies Daddy told one time when they were in a foreign country. She ain't my wife, she's my sister. And then the king saw him, no, that's something you do with your wife. Anyway. Abraham is not a perfect man by any chance. They've had this deal with Hagar. He's lied about his wife being his sister, which she was his half-sister, but she's his whole wife. And that was a half-truth, which means half truth has got half lie, which, the lie, it's like the ice in the water. The lie turns the whole thing. So anyway, the short form of the story now is that Isaac's the only son he's got. He's now about 14 or 15 years old. Now, in the story, it sounds like he's a little boy, but he's a teenager. And presumably in the night, might have been in a dream. We're not told how the Lord spoke to Abraham. But told him, take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Underline that. All his hopes and dreams, all the promises of God, everything going to be good for the future and him becoming a great multitude of nations. It's through Isaac if it's going to happen at all. And the Lord said, take him up to the land of Moriah, and one of the mountains, I'll show you which one later. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it says. Offer him for a burnt offering. Abraham obeys God to the letter. You know what faithfulness is? Faithfulness equals obedience. That's what it is. Ain't no shortcuts. Can't be faithful if you're not obedient. If you're going to be faithful, you have to be obedient. If you're obedient, you're faithful. Obedience is the only real evidence of faith. If God tells me to do something and I do something else, it's because I didn't believe what God said was the best thing, you see. If I really believe what God said is the best thing, then I'll obey Him with whatever He tells me to do because I know it's the best thing. That's part of the problem with religion and trying to be religious and doing religious things and having lists of rules. We want to prioritize. And we want to pick and choose, and we want to, figure out ways that we can circumvent different rules that we don't like, It's just like in the cafeteria in elementary school. Nobody liked the turnip greens. They came out of a can. They were awful. My buddy in the first grade, Miss Blanche, she had fingernails. They might not have been that long, but they seemed like they was that long. She'd pinch you with them. That was one of her techniques. And again, they didn't have teacher assistants, and she was there by herself with 35 wild kids. She was gone one time, and the substitute teacher, we had her head on the desk crying before the day was over. That is no joke. Woo! Everybody was in trouble when Miss Blanche came back. But anyway, we'd have to, in the cafeteria, we'd have to take our tray when we got finished and go by her, and she'd check it and make sure you'd eaten some of everything. My buddy, Chuck, I won't go into it, it's not this Chuck. Could have been. Probably would have been. He might have done it. He didn't want his turnip greens. So he put them in his milk carton. Went by Miss Blanche and she said, oh yes, let's check that milk. Standing right there and drink your milk, and then you can put your... And he had to drink them turnip greens mixed with milk. But he did. I don't know that the tears in his eyes, if that was from just not wanting to or because it tasted so bad, but anyhow. We figure out ways to, do what we want to do. With Abraham here, he's messed up some before. Told, Abimelech, told the king of Egypt that Sarah's my sister, not my wife. and will help God out and have a child with Hagar. He is not a perfect man. But when the big test of his life comes, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, go into the land of Moriah, offer him for a burnt offering. He does exactly what God said. He's a picture of faithfulness. For just a few minutes, I want us to think about the price of faithfulness. This evening, we'll look at the practice of it, and we'll look at the products of it. It produces some things in your life that you need. But up front, there's a price. It costs you to be faithful. And it costs us basically in two ways. We're told in verse 1, after these things God did tempt, and I said a better translation is test Abraham. God doesn't tempt people. In fact, in James 1:13, I believe it is, it says, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God tempteth no man, neither can he be tempted with evil. Satan tempts you to try to get you to do wrong, hoping you'll mess up. God tests you, hoping you'll do right. God arranges little tests so that we can sort of do a little self-evaluating. Am I really faithful or not? Am I really surrendered or not? So He arranges tests for us. And here's the big test. You know, in school you have the pop quizzes. Abraham hadn't done so good on some of them. But now's the big final exam, so to speak. God said, take your son, your only son. And it says, and Abraham got up early in the morning. So it happened in the night. Price of faithfulness. Price comes in two ways. They're tests, they're trials. As God arranges choices for us to make that are hard choices. You know, if all the choices in life was between, good and bad. Go out to the garden, I'm going to pick beans or I'm going to pick weeds. Not every choice is cut and dried like that, though, are they? Sometimes there's sort of a mixture. Sometimes we have to struggle because sometimes the choices are not that clear cut, are they? And here's one that would seem clear cut, except God told him to do it. I mean, you wouldn't want to take your child over to the next mountain range that you could see the mountain 3 days journey, you could see it afar off. What a test. God arranges trials for us like He did with Abraham. Think about the trial here. First thing, I've already kind of hinted at, the command was beyond all human understanding. How am I going to be the father of a multitude if I kill the only son of God? How are there going to be great nations coming from me? And it's got to come through him. And God already told me that. How's God going to keep His promises if I do this? It's not my place to keep God's promises. That's His department. But do you not think that all of these things would have been going through Abraham's mind? But he kept coming back to this is what God said to do. Now another thing that would come up, there's Sarah. Abraham's, by the way, he's a strapping 115 years old. Sarah is about 105. Isaac's about 15. Let's say I take Isaac off on this trip, and when I come back, what's Sarah going to ask? Where's Isaac? Did he get lost? What'd you do with him? What am I going to say to Sarah? What's life going to be like after I get back from up there? And there ain't no more Isaac here. Ain't no more laughter. That's what his name means. And me and Sarah are going to look at each other, and we're just a couple of old people now. And Abraham, I can tell you, he's feeling pretty old that morning as it is. What's Sarah going to do when I get back without him? Is she going to keel over and have a stroke and die right there? Is she going to get the shotgun out? What's it going to be like? Ooh. How am I going to tell her this? Something else going to be my fault, either any way you slice it. Another part of the trial. It wasn't something Abraham could just get up in the morning, let's get it over with, and it's done. Got up in the morning, saddled a donkey, cut the firewood, got the fire, a little container of hot coals. They didn't have 3 torches, you know. If you remember those. Didn't have a big click, a big lighter. Took the knife. Took Isaac. Boy, it'd been bad if he'd have left Isaac, forgot to take Isaac. I knew there was something. Look at that. Did everything so that when he got there, he could do it. But it took him several days. There they go. The servants and the donkey that's got the wood on it and all this stuff. And there's Abraham, and he's got his arm around that boy. His boy might have, teenage, oh, I'm a man, we don't hug, we'll shake hands tonight. And Abraham, no, just let your old daddy. Because Abraham is counting the cost every step as they head toward the land of Moriah. Abraham is thinking about, what am I going to have to do when I get there? How will I do it? He's enjoying his precious limited time with his boy, and he's also out of the other side of his head. He's praying to the Lord the whole time, get me through this and help me. Are you sure that's what you want me to do? All of those things you'd be going through. He's going through them. 3 days. You hear about on the battlefield in wars and stuff, soldiers that fling themselves on a grenade before it explodes to save their friends. But that's a spur-of-the-moment kind of thing, a whole different thing when you got time to think about it. 3 days later, they could see the place afar off. And Abraham said to his slaves, y'all stay here with the animal. Me and the lad will go yonder and worship, and we'll come back. They might have tried to stop him, see, if they were there. They might think, Abraham's kind of gone off his rocker here, and this trip and the heat and, all that stuff. Didn't get enough water in him, whatever. They might have tried to stop him. But Abraham did everything so that when the moment came, maybe he could do what he's supposed to do. And we know from how the story is, he was coming down with the light. It costs you in the way of trials to be faithful. But it costs you another way. It costs you in the way of sacrifices. You can't get around this from the story. He's supposed to go and kill his son. There are things you have to give up if you're going to follow Jesus. Billy Graham said you never saw a hearse with a U-Haul behind it. The things you got to leave behind if you're going to follow Jesus. And that's not just when you die. I mean, you ain't taking anything with you. The only thing you can take to heaven with you is somebody else that you shared the gospel with, and they received Christ. All the rest of it be left behind. People invest all their energy in all this stuff, and you can't find what they need when it comes up time to need it. I got all kind of tools, more than I had when I was actually a carpenter, but I can't find the right one. It's going to cost you to follow Jesus. Jesus himself said in Luke 9:23, there's a parallel in Mark 8 and another one in Matthew 16. But in Luke 9 verse 23, he said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross. And Luke's the only one that says it, take up his cross daily and follow me. For what shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? It'll cost you. I'll also tell you this. It'll cost you to be faithful. It'll cost you to follow Jesus. It'll cost you a lot more not to in the long run. How does faithfulness play out? We'll see what the practice is, but I'll give you a little preview before we go. Practice faith. Abraham was prompt. He got up early in the morning and got all his stuff together and took off with everything he needed. He didn't say, well, you know, branding time with the cattle. Got to have a roundup and a cattle drive, and then after when things slow down later this summer, then I'll go do that, Lord. He didn't put it off. My daddy, and you've heard me say what my daddy said a bunch of times. He would say, it's not enough for you to do what I tell you. You better do it when I tell you. You know something? If I have to get around to what the Lord said do, it's because there's other things more important to me than Him. Period. He was prompt. He was prepared. He cut the wood before they went. He could have cut wood on the side of the mountain, don't you think? How would it have read if the Bible had said, and lo, Abraham clave the wood on the side of Moriah, and behold, it had rained, and the wood was wet, and could not get a fire started. What if they'd been going up the mountain and Isaac said, Daddy, you got a knife? And Abraham, no, son, you got your pocket knife. Well, guess we can't do it. And we sabotage ourselves by not being prepared. Faithfulness doesn't just happen. We have to think a little bit ahead past our nose. Abraham did everything ahead of time that he could do to ensure that when the time came, he would be able to do it. And oftentimes, forgot Isaac, forgot the wood, forgot the fire. You got any matches? Wouldn't have sounded good. Wouldn't have been good. He persevered. Even when Isaac said, Daddy, where's the lamb? And Abraham said to the Lord, will see himself a lamb. The Lord will take care of it. That'd have been the perfect time to say, you're right, son. Guess we can't do it today. It's probably what I'd have done. I'm pretty good, at figuring out how to not do stuff if I don't want to do. I bet you are too. Abraham was too. But this time, Abraham passed the test. Now the question comes, have you passed the test? Look back last week. Look back last year. What kind of choices do you make? Are there things going on in your life that have no business in the life of somebody that says they're following Jesus? What are you willing to say no to? What are you willing to let go of? What is the Lord putting His finger on right now in your life that's keeping you from being faithful as you ought to be? Whatever it is, if you're a Christian and there's something hindering your faithfulness, you need to bring that right up here and give it to the Lord and leave it there this morning. If you do not know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, if you've never personally and publicly received Him as Lord, you need to do that right now. I mean in the first verse.